Change is good. Transformation is better. That's what's painted on a huge wall in the centre of where I live. Why change? Why not stay the same? Well, for some it's because they have to, for others it's a choice, and for some it happens without even knowing it. People, places, things all transform, and this short series is here to explore what change looks like. When all is said and done, the only change that will make a difference is the transformation of the human heart. Let's see about that, shall we? Hello, is it me you're looking for? I can see it in your eyes. I can see it in your smile. Just thought I'd, sing a little bit to say hello. So, hi. It's been a while. How are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. I mean, I will be surprised, honestly, if anyone is still checking this feed. If anyone is still listening out there, I will be shocked. Hello, are you there? Now, a lot has happened in my absence, I am sure. But I really do hope everyone is well and everyone is good. One thing, I was just thinking about this yesterday. One thing I have noticed is the absolute rise of Scottish podcasts. I mean, great. Obviously, as the inventor of true crime podcasts, I keep a very close eye on what's going on, what's new, what's happening, what's in the podcast charts. And here, lo and behold, I see all of these Scottish podcasts popping up, and I'm thinking, okay. Now, let me just say this. If you're even thinking of making those other Scottish pretenders to my throne your favourite, I will know. I will know that you have listened, and I won't be happy about it at all. I'm kidding. Of course I'm kidding. No, great. Love it. Bring it on. Peace, love, joy, whatever. Live, laugh, love. All that business. Each to their own. Big love to all the podcasts out there, although this is the best one. Okay, now we've got that cleared up. Shut up, Barry. What's going on in the episode? Well, we're going to look at some transformation stories. Change. That's what I'm interested in. Change. What changes people? Situations. Life. Other people. Circumstances. Illness. Wealth. Health. The list goes on, as they say. So, in this episode, I have a collection of stories for you all around the theme of change. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. For some people, needing to change is like a feeling of crawling out of their own skin. And that was definitely the case for the main character in this first story. It is believed that Dora Richter doesn't get the attention she deserves, or that the history books have kind of forgotten her. And you'll see in a moment why people might feel that way. Born Rudolf Richter in 1891 to a really poor farming family in Germany, Rudolf had no doubt in his mind at age 4 he had been born into the wrong body. Now, remember where we are here, 1891. This is kind of amazing. Rudolf just had no issue at 4 years old at telling his parents he was to be called Dora and he was to be treated as a female member of the family. In no way did Rudolf want to be treated as a male. Now, neither Dora's parents or siblings or wider family had any issue with this. They were like, sure, you do you, as the kids say. So Dora started dressing in female clothing and was treated in the family as a female. Where the family did have an issue, and I can understand this one, was when at 6 years old, Dora tried to remove her own penis at home. Ow, that is hardcore. That is fucking hardcore. But I think that's what I mean when I say people who want that change so much feel like they're crawling out of their own skin. So, using a bandage, Dora created a tourniquet. I think that's how you say that word. Is that how you say it? I hate that word, by the way. I absolutely hate it. Every time I see it written down, my brain says, nope, we're not saying that word. I think it's tourniquet is how you say it. Anyway, so yeah, basically, in an attempt to stop the blood getting into the penis, she tried to use this bandage to interrupt the blood flow. And essentially, I guessed, hoped it would fall off or the blood would stop going into it and it would die. I bet this is the point in the episode when you think, oh, I've really missed Barry. And now you're like, oh, I'm not so sure. Now I've heard about a 6-year-old trying to take their own penis off. Anyway, that wasn't successful at 6 years old. So Dora continues to live as Dora in her family up through her teenage years. And of course, that wasn't without its trials and problems. Dora would utterly refuse to wear anything male clothing-wise. It was just a real no-no. And I understand that. You know, if the very idea of putting on male clothing made Dora feel that way, I get that. However, where the problems came was when Dora tried to go and get a job. In her teenage years, this presented a problem because staff were like, people in the employers basically were like, we're going to need you to wear male presenting clothing and go by Rudolf. And to Dora, this was a nightmare, but she had to do it to be able to work and to earn money. Now, away from work, as soon as those hotel shifts or those shifts in a cafe, as soon as those ended, Dora was straight back into the clothing she wanted and living the life that she wanted. So, at age 19, Dora moves from the small place that she lives in Germany to the more progressive Berlin, the capital. Now, yeah, we know it as of course, Berlin, extremely progressive, great, but maybe at that time not quite as progressive as Dora thought. Within a week of moving there, she is arrested for the crime of cross-dressing. I don't actually think that's what the crime gets written down as, but essentially that is what she was arrested for. I think it was labelled masquerading as a woman. Now, I'm not sure if perhaps the police can arrest you based on the clothing alone, so they had to, at the time, create some other way to make it a crime. This idea, though, that you're like, what am I trying to say? Like, this idea that you're somehow faking it, somehow there's a more secretive reason and you're arrested because you're masquerading with an intention to cause harm or something. I think that's, the word masquerading just makes it all sound a bit deceptive. And I just don't think that was the case. Yeah, the word masquerading is a fabulous word. I'm currently masquerading as a podcast host. So, at its core, Dora was doing the thing that meant she could live with some kind of peace, some dignity, and experience the world the way that she believed she was meant to, and yet the law says no. So Dora is in a prison cell in Berlin. Now, of course, we know Berlin is going to become the capital of the European really liberal ideas on gender, sex, sexuality. All of that is coming down the line, but that's not the case for Dora this day, sitting in this prison cell. So when it comes to court, Dora could receive a prison sentence, but the judge in Dora's case decides instead to do this: release Dora into the care of a man called Magnus Hirschfeld. Now, Magnus Hirschfeld is a German doctor and sexologist. Probably one of the most major kind of influences on how we now understand sex, sexuality, and he really is his own episode. So he has this care facility in Berlin, and it's for people like Dora who are experiencing the world in a really difficult way because they can't live the way that they want to live, or there's more work to be done in terms of sex, sexuality, gender. So he has this facility, and when Dora comes there to live, she's allowed to wear all the clothing that she wants to wear, live as she wants. The problem was, outside of this, she still had to have a job, and she faced the same problems all the time. Every time she went for a job interview, someone would say, "That's a man dressed as a woman." So what Magnus Hirschfeld did was he created a job within his organisation for Dora. And she was working as a maid stroke housekeeper stroke cleaner. And she did this happily for many, many years. So she's now in her mid to late 20s. And for Dora, this is fine, but there's still this sense of it's not quite complete. It's not just yet right. She wants to go further. So she goes to Magnus Hirschfeld and she tells him that she wants to go through an operation in which she can properly become a female. Not just dress in female clothing, but actually go through a transition in order to make that happen. And Magnus Hirschfeld would later discuss this. He said he thought it was coming from a place of real isolation, real loneliness, that Dora still felt this sort of disconnect from the world because she just hadn't had, well, at the time no one had the operation that would make her feel like she was living the way that she wanted to live. So at this same time that Dora is living in Magnus Hirschfield's facility, he would also take in 5 other females exactly in the same position as Dora. So she now had a little gang of people who were all going through the same issue that she was going through. And over the space of a couple of years, they became like a really tight little group of friends, all working in the institution, all quite happy. They would spend their time together singing, knitting, drinking, chatting, all really happy in each other's company. But Magnus Hirschfield has got to really think about this request from Dora to go through a surgical procedure. Now, let me just say this surgery had never been performed before, and I will just mention the film The Danish Girl, which I haven't seen. I have not seen this film. But I believe that in that film, it tells the story of the first person who underwent that surgery. However, this is where the history books get rather annoyed, because actually they say, no, Dora was the first person that this actually happened to. But for some reason, her story wasn't quite as sexy as the Danish Girl, so Hollywood decided to just rewrite that, basically. So, of course, this surgery was going to be incredibly experimental. But Dora was up for that because it was what she wanted. So the first part of the surgery was to remove the testicles. They were gone. The balls are off. The second part was to give Dora a medicine which would prevent beard growth and would enhance the boob area. The third was to remove the penis, but it took 9 years between the testicles being removed and the penis being removed. So that's a long span of time to be in that kind of place where Dora didn't really want to be caught any longer in this, but, you know, like I say, it was the time that it was, and it had to be painfully slow progress because it was so brand new. And they were doing the best that they could, doctors, they were. The final part of the surgery was the reconstruction of the female genitalia, and that was the trickiest part. Doctors were brought in from all over Germany to advise, talk to Dora, talk to other doctors, watch the progress, theorise on how to do it, etc, etc. An operation was carried out, and the doctors told Dora at the time that they had done the best that they could. She had survived the surgery, and she was now the first person to have ever gone through a sex change operation. And of course, the pain and the healing would take a long time. And it's kind of amazing because Dora did actually get what she wanted, and medicine was changed forever at that point because something really extraordinary had been achieved. So it was not long after this that the Second World War began. I had to check with myself there. Yep, definitely the Second World War. And living safely in the Institute of Sex, Dora felt protected. She felt protected with her friends and with Magnus Hirschfield. And that is until the Nazis began attacking any and every establishment that had anything to do with what they considered to be sexually deviant, gay, or anything to do with Magnus Hirschfeld's research. All of his research was attacked. And what happened there was it started with groups storming into, first of all, Magnus Hirschfeld's home, stealing all of his records. And secondly, they came into the institute where Dora and her friends lived. They stole all of the records that he had, all of his patient files, all of the notes that he had, gone. At this, Magnus Hirschfeld went into hiding. He fled from Berlin because he was a target at that point. But the files containing all of their details were gone. So he was back in France, and Dora and the other girls, they had nowhere else to go, so they stayed in the institute. There was another attack carried out, and Dora Richter was never seen again. To this day, no one knows if Dora died in that attack, if she had been arrested beforehand, died in prison, but she was never ever seen again. And she was an absolute pioneer in the search to become the person that she knew she had to become. She absolutely transformed so many things. Okay, story 2. August 15th, 2019, and we're in a place called England. Have you heard of it? It's this little place just south of Scotland. We are specifically in Berkshire. It's quite a well-known part of England, the Royal Borough of Berkshire. Very pretty, very heavily populated, and the birthplace of many well-known people. Catherine, Princess of Wales, Your Royal Highness, she comes from there. Elton John, off of Rocket Man. Kate Winslet, Oscar Wilde, and Uri Geller, off of Bending Spoons with Your Mind. He's from there. Anyway, these people, not important in the story. They just happen to live there. So, in a rural area called Sulhamstead, it was a Thursday night, and there was nothing particularly special to report about this night, a sort of quiet evening, when a call comes in to the local police station, and it's reporting a suspected burglary. So the call comes in, and it's someone reporting that next door to their house there's a theft happening right in front of their eyes. So the person on the phone is reporting that they can see a quad bike being stolen from their neighbour's garden. Now, obviously quad bikes are not small things, so if you are witnessing that being stolen out of your neighbour's garden, it's pretty obvious. And they say they think it looks like a bunch of teenagers stealing it, so they're calling to report this. So the officer at the station says, "Thank you very much, I'll send someone around." So he sends a message out to officers working in the area, and 2 officers respond. Police officer Andrew Harper is with his colleague Andrew Shaw. So we've got 2 Andrews in this story. Let's call Andrew Harper by his full name, and we'll call Andrew Shaw, Shaw. So Andrew and Shaw, two police officers, they're like, right, fine, we will go to the address. When they get there, they see that it's a quiet road near the property, and they spot a car attempting to drive down a dark road with what looks like a quad bike attached to the back of it. Aha, they think. The stolen bike and the car trying to drive away. So Andrew Harper is in the passenger seat of the police car, his partner Shaw is driving, so they quickly decide that Andrew will chase the car and he will attempt to stop it. In the moment when this is all happening, the quad bike comes off the back of the car that they're following, and Andrew chases the car down the dark road. What happens next is brutal. Police officer Andrew's ankle becomes caught in the strap that's hanging down from the back of the car, which had the quad bike attached, so the strap is just hanging. His ankle gets caught in it, and with him accidentally attached to the car that's trying to speed away, he gets dragged down the road. It gets reported that he was essentially lassoed to the back of this car, and the car is moving at really high speed with him attached, and he's being thrown around at the back, and his uniform gets ripped off by the momentum, and he just gets repeatedly battered off the ground. So realising what has happened, Shaw calls for help, and he's screaming that Officer Andrew has become accidentally attached to a vehicle which is attempting to flee the scene. And at this, of course, police jump into action and they try and block off the road where the car is travelling. Andrew Harper at some point becomes disentangled from the car, and as Officer Shaw is running down the road, he gets a devastating call from another police officer who says there is a body lying in the road. And he just knows this is his partner. He just knows. As he's travelling that distance, he starts finding bits of Andrew's police uniform along the road. His vest is lying there. Bits of his trousers are lying there. So by now the officers who found Andrew are attending to him. Paramedics are called, but Andrew is pronounced dead at the scene at 11:45. This is just 25 minutes after receiving the call from that kindly neighbour about the stolen bike. What follows after this is a manhunt for the drivers of that car. Who were they? Like I said, the person who called said they thought it looked like teenagers. They were young, but they weren't sure because it was dark. So now the police are looking for a gang of young kids that they think might have stolen a car and just tried to steal a quad bike, but in the attempt to do that, have just brutally murdered a police officer. So who was Andrew Harper? Well, he was a young police officer. He was just 28 years old, and he had very recently got married, just 4 weeks before his death. He's married to a woman named Lissy, who had to receive that absolutely devastating call that her husband of 4 weeks was dead, and in the most horrendous way. Andrew had joined the police force at age 19. He'd always wanted to be a police officer, and he'd worked hard for years and years as an officer. His wife described him as selfless, beautiful, and heroic. The couple, this is terrible, they hadn't even had their honeymoon. That was still to come. That was a few weeks away. That was all planned. Their whole life was ahead of them. So with Andrew's body now being taken to the hospital for a post-mortem, the search continues. A police helicopter is sent out over the area. Like I said in the beginning, Berkshire is massive. It is a huge area, and a lot of it is rural. So, police helicopter is out. Police are everywhere trying to find this car, trying to find who is responsible. Now, amazingly, the car is found, and it's in a caravan park, or a trailer park, as you might know it, and it's been left absolutely abandoned. So police descend on the caravan park, and they begin questioning people and making arrests. A total of 10 men aged between 13 and 30 are arrested that night. Now that's a big old age range. That's a lot of people to arrest. But you see, police just didn't know what they had on their hands here. So I think just in the panic of it, in the event of it, they just arrested 10 different people. The initial charges were murder. The police were forming this theory that the car which had dragged Andrew to his death had deliberately backed into him to stop him chasing them. And when the occupants of that car saw that he was tangled in the car, they decided to drive knowing it would kill him. And even if they didn't do it deliberately, they still had to know that there was a body attached to the car that they were driving. After days and days of interviews with those 10 people arrested, police finally narrow it down to 3 suspects. Now, it's a massive operation because getting from 10 to 3 is no easy task, and police have to keep asking for additional time to interview and figure out who out of these people is responsible, who was driving, who was in the car, who knew about it, who didn't know about it, all of that stuff. But in the end, the 3 arrested were 18-year-old Henry Long and 17-year-olds Albert Bowers and Jesse Cole, and they are charged with murder. Police, like I say, believing they had fully intended to kill Andrew. They said, of course, this was not the case. It was entirely accidental. They didn't know he was attached to the car as they drove away. Now, Andrew's wife, Lissy, who I mentioned a minute ago, she was immediately in the public eye with this event. I mean, horrific. Absolutely fucking horrific. She just lost her husband. But she had a sense, she had this feeling, and she was right, she had this feeling that something was going to go amiss here, that somehow these 3 teenagers were going to end up getting off lightly with this, or that somehow this case would kind of be forgotten, or would be, what am I trying to say, like it wouldn't quite get the kind of, or have the gravity that it should have, that it would be made into a small deal. And like I say, she was right. Now, at this point, you could also be saying, this is a really tragic story, but what's it got to do with change? Well, there are 2 major reasons that this story is connected to change. So, hearing that the 3 boys who killed Andrew could potentially get short sentences if they were found guilty of manslaughter and not murder, Lissy begins to get ideas that the laws in the UK need to change. They need to change to properly punish those who kill emergency workers in the line of duty. Now, we haven't even got to court yet. Murder is still on the table. And there's a strong public reaction to the idea that manslaughter could be the outcome. You know, manslaughter would be the outcome if the jury and the judge believed that these three in the car had no idea he was attached to the back of the vehicle. Now, laws don't change fast, but Lissy begins the work. So the trial for the three teenagers begins, and it is high profile. It's being covered by nearly every major news outlet in the UK. But there's problems with the trial. There's delays. There's illness in the jury that slows things down. At one point, the prosecution want the entire jury dismissed and the whole thing to start again because one day, one of the jurors is leaving the courtroom when she turns round, smiles at the three teenage boys who are charged and mouths the word, "Bye, boys," and then leaves. And of course, Andrew's widow is sitting there going, why is one of the bloody jurors being so friendly with these three that are accused? Like, what's going on here? Obviously, the prosecution and Lissy find this absolutely unacceptable, and they claim that members of the jury are actually already on the side of the teenagers and showing them sympathy. And that's exactly what I meant earlier on. She has this sense that somehow it's going to become, it was just three silly teenage boys, it was just a misadventure. And she is absolutely determined that won't be the case. So during the trial, this is how the three teenagers behaved. Henry Long, aged 19, he was the one driving the car that night. The defence barrister says to him, "You pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Why is that?" And this 19-year-old says, "Because I accept that I killed him from what I did, from the way that I was driving, but I didn't mean it." He says he never heard a thing being dragged behind that car. Albert Bowers, the 18-year-old, according to what we've heard from what was going on inside the car, he knew exactly what was happening. He knew that there was a body attached to the back of that vehicle. And he simply said to the driver, "Just put some music on and that will drown it out." He says that was not the case at all. He had no idea there was something attached to the back of his car. And the other passenger, Jesse Cole, he was smirking and laughing the whole way through the court case. Police said he showed absolutely no remorse or didn't seem to care that he'd been involved in this event. So during the trial, Lissy begins to really campaign for what she calls Harper's Law. And this law would ensure that there are mandatory life sentences given to those who kill on-duty emergency workers. The Home Secretary at the time in the UK, Priti Patel, gets involved. And that's because this death is horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. But as you can imagine, there is a strong reaction in the police force to Andrew's death and other emergency services. They share their outrage and they want justice. So the judge who's presiding, what's the word? I'm just going to say presiding. I don't think that's right. Anyway, looking after the case, he has really got his work cut out for him. I mean, he must have been absolutely tearing his hair out because this is all, it's just all coming together at the same time. You know, he's got these three teenagers here. He's got the potential that the law might change. He's got all of this kind of like happening. And there's reports of things like these three boys family members are harassing people outside of the court. The whole thing's just a mess, basically. But in the end, the three boys are found guilty of manslaughter and given these sentences. Henry Long, the driver, is given 16 years in prison, and the other two passengers are given 13 years. For Lissy, it's even more reason to try now and get that law passed. And she makes it happen, which is amazing. I mean, she makes a major change in the UK law based on her fight for justice. Now, it doesn't change the sentence of those three, but it does for every case that's going to come in the future. Andrew's death certificate says that he died of multiple injuries. A post-mortem reveals that he probably fell unconscious immediately and wouldn't have known that his body was being dragged. Over 1,000 people turned up to Andrew's funeral, and members of the UK government attended. 5,000 motorcyclists took what they called a ride of respect along the route that Andrew died on, and finally, I love this, the police force, which Andrew belonged to, got a new horse and they called it Harper, which is bloody brilliant. Honestly, love that. What a tribute. Honestly. If I drop dead tomorrow, don't do anything other than name a horse after me. I would be happy with that. Now, there is a second reason that this is about change, not just about the law, because when researching, right, I'll be honest, I'd never heard of the Andrew Harper story. I know I said it was on every major UK news outlet. I must have been, watching something else that week, or just not listening to the radio or reading any newspapers. But this story caught my attention when I was actually looking for something else. I was interested in this idea of people who are granted anonymity or new identities based on crimes that they've committed. And I was to discover that there was a great deal of outrage when it was suggested that the three killers of Andrew Harper would be given new identities on their exit from prison. Now, the assumption being that these three boys would never be safe in the UK, as they will always be the killers of a police officer. And the argument for giving them new identities is that for the rest of their life, they're going to be targets, basically. Every time they ever have to interact with any of the emergency services, they're always going to be known as the boys who killed a police officer. However, it turns out that wasn't actually granted, and when they leave prison, they will leave with the same names and the same faces that they went in there with. And of course, I got my thinking cap on, and I thought, I wonder about people who have tried to change their own identity when running from a crime. And this led me to Story 3, the killing of Lindsay Hawker. Lindsay Hawker was a 22-year-old British teacher working in Japan in 2007. Now, she was there to teach English for a year. And when she was there, she met 28-year-old Tatsuyuki Ikasashi, a Japanese man who he lived not far from where she was teaching. Now, Tatsuyuki showed an interest in Lindsay, but it wasn't reciprocated. She had a boyfriend. Back home in England, she wasn't interested. And Tatsuyui said, "That's okay, but perhaps what you could do is meet me one-on-one and give me an English lesson." And she said, "Okay, fine, I will." So she goes to meet him for the English lesson, and it's in a cafe. It's 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. They finish the lesson, and no one knows why this bit happened, but she took a taxi back to Tatsuyui's apartment. Now, when they got there, Lindsay asked the taxi driver to wait for her. She was going to go run inside, get something, and she would be back. After 10 minutes, she hadn't returned, and the taxi driver left. Inside the apartment, Tatsuyui raped and strangled Lindsay, beating her body, and then put her dead body in his bathtub and filled it with sand. Horrific. Just horrific. The following day, her parents in the UK raised the alarm bell that something was amiss. Something wasn't right because their daughter hadn't been in touch, and she normally would be in touch, and a search for Lindsay began. Now, during this time, Tatsuyui moved the bathtub from inside his apartment with her body in it to the balcony of his apartment. When I read that, I thought, what the bonkers shit is that? But it since turned out you can't see anything on that balcony. So it's not like he was moving the bath out for everyone to see. He was just moving it to get rid of the smell in his apartment. So when police are looking into this, they discover from the taxi driver that she was dropped off here. The taxi driver was supposed to wait, but didn't. So she went into the apartment, and police are guessing she never came back out of the apartment. So they prepare to make an arrest. 9 officers arrive at Tatsuyui's apartment ready to arrest him. And I learned this fascinating fact. In Japan, unless you have absolute proof that the person that you are approaching is guilty, you can't knock their door. You have to wait outside for the opportune moment of them leaving the apartment. Unless you have absolute solid evidence, then you can knock the door. If you don't, you have to wait outside and apprehend them or speak to them as they leave their own apartment. So at 9:30 in the evening, Tatsuyui appears with no shoes, random, but he's got a rucksack. And when he sees police who are standing outside of his apartment in the street, he runs. He knows why they're there. Of course he knows why they're there. And he manages to outrun the police and get away through the streets of Japan. For 2 years, he evades police by staying on the run. And he had an idea about how he might evade police forever. Change his face. Simple, right? Well, I guess. If you can afford surgery, yes, I'm sure it's fairly easy to do. But if you can't afford surgery, and Tatsuyui couldn't afford it, then for him, it was going to have to be a homemade job. His first act was to focus on the 2 moles that he had on his face. Both were on his left cheek. He decided to get a box cutting knife and dig them out of his face. Oh my God. Horrible. Now, if you don't like the sound of that, you're going to hate what he does next. He tries to cut off part of his lower lip in order to make it thinner. For fuck's sake. Oh. This he has to do in 2 stages because of the pain. So in one of the motels that he's hiding out in, he basically takes a pair of scissors and tries to cut off part of his lower lip. He's unsuccessful, and for the next 3 days he has to wear a surgical mask over his face to hide it. Then he gets to a point where he can't take the pain any longer, and he goes into a public bathroom and finally cuts the lip until it's thinner. Horrid. Next, he gives himself a nose job with a needle and thread. So taking a needle and a thread, he starts piercing through his nose in an attempt to get his nostrils to come together, to make his nose a different shape. As he's performing these homemade surgeries, he's moving around different parts of Japan, taking on different jobs. When I read that bit, I was like, taking on different jobs. Okay, interesting. So I'm an employer in Japan. I have, my, let's say, cafe that I'm the manager of. And I'm interviewing for staff. In walks Tatsuyui for a job interview. Do you not think my first question would be, why is half your face hanging off? I'd love to give you this job, Tatsuyui, but you appear to only have half a lip. What the hell's going on? But no, he seemed to, I don't know if it was surgical masks or what, but yeah, he seemed to be earning money from different jobs. So for 2 years, he was on the Japanese top 10 most wanted criminals. Now, the surgeries, sadly, they hadn't really done what he wanted. He was still seeing wanted posters of his face all over the place, and they kind of looked like what he looked like now. And I guess there's a lesson here. You just can't give yourself a nose job at home. That's it. I mean, if you've learned anything at all in this episode, just don't try a nose job at home, okay? Anyway, from that jumping from job to job, he'd saved up a little bit of money, and he used this to book himself into a proper plastic surgeon at a Japanese clinic. But this would be Tatsuyui's undoing. While he thought he was going to get a new face and get away with this murder forever, no. Staff at the clinic were immediately alarmed by his face. The fact that they could see traces of moles which they thought had been cut out in a strange fashion said that something was wrong. The damage to his lip, the damage to his nose, they were immediately like, something's not right here. So what they did was, the staff at the clinic, thinking fast, they took detailed photographs of his face, telling him, this is just a part of the process. But what they actually did was sent those pictures to the police. Days after that visit to the clinic, he is in a hotel room when he sees those pictures on the news. The surgery had sent them to the police. The police knew this was Tatsuyui, the man they were looking for, and immediately news were alerted to get these pictures of him out and about. So, at seeing this, he runs from the hotel, he cuts his hair short, he goes to a costume shop where he buys a fake moustache. I mean, this guy, come on now. Come on. Be sensible, man. A fake tash is always a fake tash. It never looks real. It never looks real. 2 days later, he is arrested at a ferry terminal as he tries to flee Japan. Immediately, he confesses to the killing of Lindsay and the 2 years on the run. Now he's given life in prison, which is exactly where he is right now with a weird face. Lindsay's body was returned to her parents, and she was buried in England. Okay, the final story is one about what happens when one person tries to change another. Let's get old-timey, shall we? Picture, if you will, lots of old-timey detectives, 1920s style, sitting around smoking cigars and saying things like, "I know the dame did it, I just gotta prove it." Now picture a young, beautiful woman looking a bit like Catherine Zeta-Jones in Chicago, and you've got the picture. So it's the Roaring Twenties, and Velma Van Voort was a well-known nightclub girl. She was seen in all the nightclubs. She would often be up singing, dancing. She hung out with, people of the time with such great names as Legs Diamond, Dutch Schultz. I have no idea who these people are, but they sound fabulous. So Velma was in her early 20s, and she enjoyed the nightlife, and she made no apology for this. And this was in Cleveland, and she was reported to smoke cigarettes, dance with men, and sleep with women. Oh, the scandal, the shock. Now, Velma was really known for her devil may care, who cares what anyone thinks approach to life. And she was a fan of a sexy outfit, getting all dressed up, going out with her friends, entertaining in the clubs. Now, Velma had a string of girlfriends, and those who knew her just assumed that's who she was. And she always seemed to have some kind of girlfriend on the go. Now, plenty of men were interested in her. Velma was beautiful, really stunning, and admirers came her way aplenty. So it was a surprise to friends of hers when a man by the name of Eddie West became her boyfriend. Now, this is what's reported at the time, and I love it. Eddie West, a man in his mid-30s, 10 years older than Velma, met her in the club she was dancing and whispered in her ear, "Baby, where'd you get them beautiful eyes?" And that was the line that caught her attention. Now, if you take anything from this episode, it's that chat up line. I'm telling you, next time you're in the supermarket and you see someone attractive, all you've got to do is say, "Baby, where'd you get them beautiful eyes?" And boom, I bet it works. Within weeks, Velma was living with Eddie, and it was in his suburban home in Ohio. And very quickly, they got married. She became Mrs. Velma West. Now, this quiet suburban town, it was not ready for the party girl that was about to hit the neighbourhood. And pretty quickly, she was the target of gossip and whispering. You know, you get the vibe, you know what I mean. People shocked at the way she dressed, she swore, she smoked, she drank, and all of that business. And before long, Velma started to realise that maybe this marriage was a mistake. So that's what's going on. But who really was Velma? That's what I'm interested in. Now, there's lots of conflicting reports about her, and I think that interests me. Some will say she was spoiled. She was prone to extreme mood swings. She had fragile mental health. Her physical health was poor, and she was inclined to faint in public. Others will say she was wild, full of mischief, free-spirited. Do you know what? Maybe she was all of those things. I think that's perfectly possible. One thing that Eddie, her husband, really wanted to change was the frequent trips that Velma would take to Cleveland, where she would go and she would visit her friends and really go all out on that sort of nightclub life. Once a week, she packed up her little green car full of dresses, makeup, and without Eddie, off she went to meet her friends. And what Velma was really up to was she was seeing her old female lovers. And it's something that she struggled with greatly. This want to kind of be with her female lovers and, well, quite honestly, to go and have sex with women is what she really wanted to do. And her and Eddie, they would fight about it a lot. He was not happy that she kept disappearing off every week. And when they argued, here comes another fantastic line. When they argued, she told Eddie, "You can't keep a 12 o'clock girl in a 9 o'clock town." I love that phrase. I'm going to start using it a bit myself. If anyone asks me to do anything, I'll be like, sorry, I can't do it. I'm a 12 o'clock girl and this is a 9 o'clock town. So the 12 o'clock Velma, she's making these trips to see her lover, Mabel. Mabel is the true love of her life. And Velma and Mabel, they had met in one of the clubs. They were mad about each other. But it was a secret. It was a secret from Eddie, and Velma wanted to keep it that way. But rumours start to get back to Eddie that his wife is engaging in a little more than just a night out every week when she gets in her car and disappears. So they begin to argue more and more and more. One day, Eddie's sister comes over to the house to drop something off, and she can't get into the house because the door is locked. And she thinks, that's odd, the door is never locked. So she tells a few other family members that she couldn't get into the house and that Velma's car isn't there, so she must be away on one of her jaunts to Cleveland. So a day or two passes. The family really start to worry because they haven't heard or seen Eddie. So they call the police. Police enter the home and they find a really gruesome crime scene. Eddie's body is in the couple's bedroom on the floor, draped in a blood-stained quilt. His head has been beaten in. His face has been smashed to bits. Under the quilt, they discover that his hands and his feet have been bound with cord. Now, extremely important to say here, Eddie West was not a small man. He was well over 6 feet tall, huge, big, broad shoulders, and he carried quite a lot of weight. A really big, imposing figure. So immediately police think, well, this must have been a gang. Given the brutality of the attack, it has got to have been carried out by a group of people. In the room, they find a claw hammer covered in blood. and they determine that that's what's been used to bash his head in. But looking at his other injuries, they think, something like a big wooden or a metal instrument has got to also have been used here. Eddie's family immediately point the finger at Velma. Now, police will say that's not possible. Velma is a tiny little woman. She's petite. She's wee. She's a little doll, according to police. So there's no way she could do this. However, they bring Velma back from Cleveland. They try to establish her alibi, and she claims, well, I know nothing about it. I left for Cleveland days ago. I don't know anything about his death. However, she can't really keep that lie up for very long. Within hours of being questioned, Velma cracks. She admits her guilt. She did it. She whacked the guy. And she says it was self-defense. She says Eddie was in a monstrous rage, and he came at her in the bedroom of their home, and the only thing that she had to hand was a curtain pole, and that she was hitting him with it to stop him from getting at her, and she says it got out of hand. Before she knew it, he was dead. And then police ask, what about the claw hammer which smashed his face to bits? Velma says, yeah, okay. Once he was dead, I did get the claw hammer and I did do his face in. So it was the curtain pole first and the claw hammer second. Then what? Then she says she threw a blanket over his body, got in her car and left. She went to see Mabel. She went to see her girlfriend who was waiting for her, and together they went out to a party. Police, without Velma knowing this, had Mabel in the next room being interviewed, because they were starting to develop this theory that both women had planned this and had carried this out together in order to have no pesky husband hanging around, and that they would be together. At this, Velma flips out. She loses her shit when she finds out that Mabel has been brought into this. She swears Mabel has nothing to do with it. Velma quickly gains the nickname the Modern Murderess. I mean, this was 1927, and I suppose, looking at that now, we see a lot of this, but this was big news at the time. So Velma gets a lawyer and she awaits her fate. Now, the bad news is that if she's found guilty in a court, she will face the death penalty. So at this point, she's just waiting. She's waiting for the court case to start. She's gone a few weeks without seeing Mabel, but she manages to get a letter to her, and it says this: if I don't burn for it, I'll be gone for life. Just do this, Mabel. Commit some crime. Get locked up here, and then we can be together. Mabel doesn't do this, but she is in communication with Velma. Letters back and forth. When the court case comes around, it's an absolute circus. Press are everywhere trying to cover this case and report on the modern murderess. Now, the self-defence strategy, it doesn't play out too well in court. Sympathy for Velma is lacking. People who saw her on the night of Eddie West's death said she was the absolute life of the party. Her and Mabel were tearing up a storm on the dance floor. They were having fun. So the jury were having a hard time believing that she was this victim of self-defence. I've just got this image of like, do you know like those 1930s hats that women wore? Just like crowds of women standing outside the court going, I knew she was trouble. I just knew it. It's the way she smoked. I just knew she was trouble. After a few days in court, it's looking like the whole thing is going to go against Velma. She asks her lawyer if it's possible that she could change her plea from guilty by reason of self-defence to just plain guilty. And that's in the hope that she won't be given the death penalty. You see, Velma was not done with living yet. Eddie West had done his best to try and change Velma into the suburban wife that he wanted. And look where that got him. Not very far. And as far as Velma was concerned, going to prison, well, that wasn't going to slow her down. Her lawyer agrees with this, and the judge is actually in favour of this. Now, the who? Hi now, the judge, the George, who's he? The judge, he's quite harsh on Velma, make no mistake. He calls her a cold-blooded killer. But he also accepts that in a moment of rage, she killed Eddie, and that she didn't plan the crime. He says that her wild nature took a wrong turn that day. And yes, she needs to be punished for what she did, but not killed. Adding another sort of element to the court case was Mabel's testimony. Now, Mabel never actually appeared in court, but she did provide this written testimony, which played down their relationship hugely. It really differed from what the press was reporting at the time. It didn't paint them as this fun-loving couple. Instead, Mabel claimed she was a woman interested in reforming people, and that's what her interest in Velma had been. She said there was nothing romantic between them. Instead, she was someone who wanted to get Velma on the right track, wanted to calm her down and make her a more respectable member of society. That's what the court heard. Was that the truth? Opinions differ. We don't know. People who knew them said, that is absolute bollocks. They were getting freaky in the sheets, left, right and centre. There is no way that Mabel was in this as some sort of agent of change for Velma. They were lovers. Anyway. Interesting. I think a lot of that miscommunication, all that misinformation at the time, I think it comes a lot from what the press could and couldn't say. In fact, lots of newspapers tried to claim that Velma's attraction to women was evidence of her insanity, and really that's why she should be locked up. You know, never mind the dead guy. Never mind the guy that she beat to death and then did his face in with a hammer. No. Send her to prison because, you know, she likes getting into bed with women. Interesting. Anyway, in court on the final day, Mabel awaits her fate and is found guilty of second-degree murder, with a chance of parole after 17 years. So she's taken to Maryville State Reformatory for Women. She's led out of court to travel there, and I'll try to post some pictures that show you what the outside of the courtroom looked like. It's just bananas. I mean, it's literally people crammed on top of each other in their hundreds to see her going to jail because she is the modern murderess. So, here she is. She's in prison. Prison reform. I'm sure I could do a year's worth of episodes on prison reform. And of course, they would be sensational stories of change within the prison system. But Velma, do we think, listeners, that Velma walked into prison one day and the next day was a changed woman? No, siree. No way, Josie. For the first few years, she was an absolute hellraiser. As well as fights with inmates, she had run-ins with prison guards continually. She wouldn't follow any rules. And in the end, what happened is prisoners began to really dislike Velma because her constant acting out meant that there was increased security. Wherever she went, it was likely she was going to cause a ruckus, as they say. I mean, at one stage in prison, I don't even know what happened here, she was brought into a formal meeting and accused of trying to incite a murder inside the prison. So, after years of troublemaking, she gets to attend her parole board hearing to see if there is a chance that she might be freed, and it's denied. The parole board say there is simply no evidence that you have attempted to change your behaviour in any way. Now, Velma does not take this information very well. So here's what she does. She gets 2 of her inmates together and she plots and she plans and she schemes for months to escape because she wants freedom, and by hook or by crook she's going to get it. So, along with 2 of her fellow inmates, she escapes from the prison and she goes on a 6-month break from prison in which she gets to have all of the relationships that she wants to have with the females that she can find and who she is attracted to. She goes back to partying, she's drinking, she's smoking, she is having a whale of a time. Her and these 2 inmates, they are just travelling all over the place from cheap motel to cheap motel, throwing parties, getting involved in all kinds of shenanigans, stealing money here and there. Eventually, they get caught. When they're brought back, Velma gets sat down by the heads of the prison and they ask her, why? Why did you do it? Why did you escape? Is it so horrendous here? Did you have to go? And she says, yeah, it is, because this place is trying to make me someone I'm not. I had to go out there and live my life the way that I want to live it. I had to go out there and be who I am. I don't think they were very sympathetic about her her reasons. But Velma, she didn't really apologise for the fact that she'd gone on the run for 6 months. Didn't really seem to care. For the next few years, she just muddled along in prison. But slowly, things did begin to change for Velma. She started to quieten down. She started to spend a lot of time in prison on her own. She took up writing, she took up playing instruments, and often she would lock herself away for hours and hours just doing these things on her own. Then she fell ill. She was diagnosed with cancer. And at that point, she began to lose drastic amounts of weight. During this time, Velma began to attend church within prison. And slowly, she became very, very spiritual, very, very religious, spending hours on her own reading passages from the Bible and talking to no one. By the time she was 53 years old, death was approaching for Velma. She was just 5 stone in weight. She spoke to no one in prison. She had become utterly isolated from everyone. And at age 53, she died in prison. By the time she died, she was old news. People had moved on from the Velma West story. She'd been in prison for years. By that time, there had been 100 more modern murderesses, or however you say that word. There had been 100 more. And it was old news. It was old hat now. But for Velma West, I do think her story is interesting, because I think she was someone who just didn't want to change, but the circumstances and the life forced that change. And she's back to what I was talking about in the beginning. What makes a person change? Lots of things. Circumstance, money, health, all of these things. And so Velma West serves as a good example. And so ends the episode. All right then. Well, I hope you enjoyed those stories. 4 stories, all very different, but I hope you enjoyed them. Okay, I'll be back soon with the next part of the Transformation series. Until then, get in touch, say hello. If you haven't already joined the Facebook group, please do. It's a wonderful place to be. Say hello on all the other social medias. I'm on the Twitter. I'm on the Instagram. I'm not on the TikTok. Well, I kind of am on the TikTok. I've got an account, but I just don't know what you do on TikTok. I don't know what you do when you get there. So that's good. if anyone knows, but do please let me know. But I'm just not quite sure. Every time I go on TikTok, it's just somebody dancing or a dog doing something funny, which is great, and I love that. But I'm not quite sure what a podcast does when it's on there. But I'm sure by this point, probably other podcasts have got this cracked, and I've somehow missed the boat. But anyway, okay. So until we speak again. Okay. Goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on. Let's do it. Let's get it over.